the History on the Edge lecture series today. We are honored to have Zachary Mazur, senior historian at the Poland Museum of the History of Polish Jews and lecturer at the Polish Academy of Science. He also serves as he holds a PhD in history from Yale University, awarded in 2018. His lecture today is titled Beyond the Balance Sheets, a qualitative analysis of monetary trust in interwar Poland. Zach, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So hi everyone. It was a good catch with the qualitative, not quantitative. Though we are going to have some numbers as well. We'll talk about that at the very end. So as you can tell from the title of my talk here, I am interested in the idea of trust and the idea of trust in money and currency, and we're going to need to establish a few things about what that means first. So how can we take stock in trust? So first of all, I'm saying in this talk that I view money in part as a bet on the future. What does that mean? So sure, money is it's a means of exchange, but if you're going to hold cash for any amount of time, then you need to understand that it's going to hold value for a long time. So if you think about periods of inflation or hyperinflation, generally people are going to spend that money as quickly as possible, or they're going to look for some other holder of value, right? So then you see like the gold markets go crazy during times of inflation because people are looking for other things to put their money into, or maybe it's art, whatever. If you're talking about the super wealthy. But in terms of trust, the literature on this topic, and I'm generally talking about the sociological literature, it views trust not as a behavior per se, but as an expectation. So we trust that someone will act in a certain way. We trust that we walk down the street that no one's going to beat us up, and we trust that the sun will come out tomorrow. If you're a fan of Annie, therefore, I'm proposing in this case to look at savings in particular, right? So people are trusting in the money, and therefore they're going to be able to put that money away for the future. And I'm also drawing on another body of literature here on the social meaning of money. In particular, this kind of work has shown how money has symbolic and a kind of flexible nature, meaning that not all money is created equal, right? We have different associations with it, not just in terms of different currencies, but also different types of money. So one of the findings from this Zelizer study is that she shows how people are treating, in particular, she had a study about prostitutes in Sweden, and she was showing how they treat the money that they get from their sex work and the money that they get from the government in welfare as completely different things. They might blow the money for their sex work on drugs and other things, but the money from welfare is treated very, very differently. So we have different associations with this kind of stuff. And I'm proposing to access these attitudes towards money through particular campaigns of propaganda and that kind of stuff. So we'll take a look at how that is flowing out. But first, we need to get. And I have an image that was created by Napkin AI. I want to give credit where credit is due to the AI. But this is just kind of an image of sort of what I'm trying to do by showing trust in money and the different factors that are going into it. So historical, and then legal and cultural, and ultimately psychological as well, if we can play kind of pop psychologist. But the context here is very important. So I want to kind of set up what the context is for trust in the interwar Polish monetary system. And at the outset, we have a lot of barriers to trust. We have the experience of the First World War, when a lot of people lost all of their money, banks went bust, And there was also an issue of governments kind of disappearing overnight. For example, in 1915, the Russians retreat from Warsaw, and all of a sudden the government that was backing the money that you had is gone, right? So there is a serious issue there. The second issue, which we'll talk about in some detail, is the inflation and hyperinflation crisis of 1919-1924. And obviously this is very important psychologically. If you've gone through this period where maybe you put away money or you've had a bunch of cash and all of a sudden it loses its value very quickly, that can be an issue for the future. And finally, the lack of financial literacy. There's a huge issue of a lack of financial literacy or like regular literacy in this area. So, as you all know, the First World War ends in November 1918. And that's the same moment when Poland declares independence. We get a new Polish state, but it doesn't mean that all of a sudden there is a single currency. There's no kind of single way of maintaining transactions throughout all of the Polish lands. We also have a lot of wars going on at the same time. So there's a lot of chaos in general, but there's also chaos in terms of the currencies available. And so this is just a list, an incomplete list really of the currencies that were in use in the Polish lands from 1919 till about 1923, even 24 to some degree. So some of these things might be somewhat unexpected. For example, there's a number of different types of rubles that are in circulation. We'll talk about why. But I looked at a bunch of different banking journals to try to figure out which ones were most highly valued and trying to understand, okay, why, for example, is the Austrian crown still more highly valued than the German mark, whereas, you know, the Austrian Empire is gone, but Germany still exists, right? So these are kinds of weird things that I'm trying to make sense of. There was a lot of frustration about these Ukrainian currencies actually during this period because people in Eastern Galicia were forced to take on Ukrainian currency from some short-lived Ukrainian republics, and then they were still holding them. They could be exchanged in certain places, but for the most part, they were not very highly valued at all. And obviously, the Ukrainian government that was backing this money no longer existed, right? These were very short-lived republics that were in existence from 1917 until 1919. And there is also the issue of the Austrian crowns that are in circulation. There were Austrian crowns that were being circulated all over the former Habsburg lands. And what was happening was within each of these countries, the countries started to stamp them and sort of, give ownership to a particular country. So we have Czechoslovak crowns, we have, German, Austrian crowns, Hungarian crowns, and Polish crowns as well. And there were also crowns that had no stamp at all, and those actually happened to be the most highly valued for whatever reason. So getting back to the ruble, because I mentioned that we have many types of rubles, and this has to do with the various stages of the Russian Revolution and different authorities that are issuing these currencies. This is a 3 ruble note. This one comes from before the First World War, and you can see, if you can read the old Russian type here, and actually it's not that clear, but it claims to be backed by gold. So this 3 ruble note was particularly highly valued. Now, it's a 3 ruble note that claims to be backed by gold. Do you think that someone living in Poland at that time, let's say it's 1919, do they actually realistically think that they can go to a Russian bank and exchange it for literal gold? No, of course not, right? That's impossible. But for whatever reason, that claim to be backed by gold still had psychological power. So this was much more highly valued than the nominally bigger note, the 25 ruble note, that was created during World War I and had no claim of gold backing. Then we also have the so-called Babylonian ruble. This is called as such because of the number of languages that we have on here. We have, there's Chinese, Arabic, there's English even here, Workers of the World Unite. And these notes were circulated pretty widely, and they were created, you can see, created in 1919 by the Soviet government. So of those three notes, we have a 3 ruble note, we have a 25 ruble note, and a 500 ruble note. The 3 ruble note is the most valuable during this period. And that has to do with what was potentially backing it, a non-existent Tsarist government, right? So really strange stuff. And basically what is being talked about at the time is that the claim of backing in gold is the reason why it's more valuable. But that kind of doesn't make sense. That doesn't, match up, doesn't pass the smell test, if you will. But the 500 ruble note was also being exchanged in Poland at the time, but just not nearly as highly valued. So if you wanted to exchange it for a different currency, you would need a lot of these 500 ruble notes in order to do so. Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting piece in general. Obviously, the claim here with all the languages is that this will be a universal currency. We have to remember that the Russian Revolution was meant to be a global revolution. So Lenin was he was kind of like the Elon Musk of the day. He was big on ideas, but kind of not great on follow through. Not 100% on follow through anyway. So these foreign currencies were in competition with the Polish mark, and the Polish mark was created during the First World War, during the German occupation of a piece of what became Poland. They started issuing the Polish mark, which was actually mostly printed in Vienna, continued to be printed in Vienna even after the First World War. This note basically says that it's a temporary currency. We get a note here in the middle that says this will be exchangeable for a future currency. And we have, I mean, it's not very clear in this projection here, but we have an image of Queen Jadwiga. So she's supposed to give you some sense that like this is a Polish thing, you can trust it, and we have the old queen backing it. Another note from a similar period, the 100 mark note features Kościuszko, who is the leader of an uprising at the end of the 18th century. But for the most part, these currencies were not really wanted, and they were officially the only legal tender in Poland in January 1920, which is relatively quick. They hadn't really solved the currency problems yet, but they were already forcing people to use only the Polish mark. But because they weren't really wanted, they became kind of cheap, and we get a period of inflation and then hyperinflation starting in 1923. Quite interestingly, Poland's hyperinflation crisis is simultaneous with the German one. There's a lot of hyperinflation during this period all over Europe. There's basically no country in Europe that didn't have an inflation crisis or a hyperinflation crisis during this period, including Norway. How many of you knew that there was an inflation crisis in Norway during this period? But yeah, they were not involved in World War I, but for, not directly anyway, but for whatever reason, they also went through an inflation crisis during this period. So people are kind of running away from the Polish mark, and that's part of the reason why that the Polish mark becomes so inflated. And they look for other ways to hold value. So they're looking mostly to put their savings into foreign currency or into bonds. So we see a lot of people putting their money into bonds, and then this advertisement on the right is encouraging people to buy a bond for the military, and it's supposed to be protecting you from disaster, basically, right? This was a quite effective way of getting some money out of the economy, was to get people to buy these bonds. So, just before I get to that, to end this period of hyperinflation, we get a new currency. So there's a new currency introduced in April 1924, specifically by Władysław Grabski, who was a finance minister and also kind of the ideas man behind all this currency reform that was going on. And there was a lot of discussion about what the currency should be called. There was an idea that it should be called the polon. That was one idea. Another one was the lek, which, is fine. But the reason why they didn't choose lek is because they were worried about how it would be pronounced by foreigners. They didn't want it to be pronounced lech or something, which is weird because then they chose złoty, but whatever. But złoty has historic meaning. There were currencies in the past that were already called złoty, and for anyone who knows the Slavic language, you can probably guess what it means. It means gold, right? So that's already giving it some kind of cachet, right? That it is potentially backed by gold, and it was backed by gold. It was tied to the gold exchange standard. But I'm not entirely convinced by the idea that the gold exchange standard is the reason why people would trust a currency or not trust a currency. And in fact, as soon as this currency is introduced, there is a period of inflation again. So it doesn't really solve all the problems. So after they introduce this currency, and we get some kind of stabilization after 1925, 1926, that's when we see a huge rise in kind of propaganda encouraging people to save their money. And this was the main focus of the research here, was trying to pick out what are the dominant narratives that are trying to encourage people to think about money differently and think about that money so that they will potentially save it and put it off to the side. And so this thing at the top in Yiddish is encouraging parents to tell their kids to save money. So that's one way of doing it, is rather than directly saying, hey, you adults, save money, it's, telling the parents to tell their kids. It's like an interesting psychological move, right? If you tell people what to do directly, then maybe they will resist in some way. So anyway, so I've picked out some of the dominant narratives. I'm going to go through these. And then, I've used sources from mostly from Polish banks, but also from Jewish and Ukrainian cooperatives, and we'll talk about those toward the end as well. So the first type of narrative that we see is the horror story. So this is one that's probably the most common, I would say, and it is trying to convince people that they should be putting their money into banks because otherwise they're going to lose it, right? And so this is a headline that says, "How to lose money without war or revolution. 50,000 zloty found in a table leg." And the story goes that some guy in Lviv had all of his savings in a false leg in a table, and some thieves found out from the maid or whatever that this was the deal, that they had stashed all this cash inside of a table leg, and the thieves came into the house and took the table leg, and the money's gone, right? So that's just one kind of example, and actually this appeared in the regular press. So we see these kinds of stories also appearing in the regular press. They may have been planted by the banks, though. Another fun story that we get, and this was from a series called The Plight of Women. And it was all these very female-focused stories that were basically showing, lessons about why people should be saving. So this one, called Cyganka, Gypsy Woman, is a story actually focused on two servant women who were living in Warsaw. This claims to be a true story. but I have no evidence that this is actually a true story. Only that claim. So 2 servant women are living in Warsaw. One of them, Kasia, she's extremely frugal. She's talking to her friend about how she has all these plans for the future, and she's been saving her money in the bank. And she has a vision for the future. She wants to buy a plot of land and get married and have a whole bunch of kids with her hometown sweetheart. Meanwhile, she has a friend, Anja, who is also a servant, but who likes to go out. She likes to go to the cinema. She likes to buy her dresses and everything. And she gets convinced by this friend that maybe she should start thinking about saving money too. She should think about the future a little bit more. So she starts to save money, but she doesn't save money in the bank. She just puts it in a can, and she has her little hiding place for it in a cubby somewhere. And one day she's visited by a tsiganka, this gypsy woman who's coming around to the different apartments and offering to read their what's it called? To read their future? No, but to read their fortune. Thank you very much. To read their fortune. So she invites the woman in, because she wants to find out what's going to happen with her. Is she going to get married? Is she going to be able to save enough money to buy the property and get that dream home that she always wanted? So she invites her in, and the gypsy woman, she knows everything. She's guessing. Oh, I think that you're saving for a house. Oh, okay. Then they start talking, and the gypsy woman says, look, I can double your money. All you have to do is put it on the table. I'm going to do a little ceremony, and we're going to double your money. So she does it. She pulls out the can of money. She puts it on the table. The gypsy woman puts a scarf around Anja's eyes and does a little dance. And poof, she's out the door. She took the money. The money's gone. So the lesson here, of course, put your money in the bank and don't give it to some random person that you just met, right? So she's then destitute. Of course, she's lost all of her savings. And there are a ton of different stories like this that we see in the press, but also in dedicated pamphlets that were being produced at the time. Another narrative that we see is this appeal to civilization, the claim that if you are a civilized person, then you should be thinking about the future and you should be saving money. And this particular cover comes from a radio show or a radio segment that was literally called "Think About Tomorrow," right? So in this kind of story, we see kind of comparisons between different civilizations. There's wild people who don't think about the future, and then there are civilized people who do think about the future. And for whatever reason, in a lot of these narratives, we keep seeing Belgians come up. I don't know why. Belgians are held up to be the most civilized people with their record in the Congo. I don't think that's exactly right, but whatever. At the time, they thought that was a thing. Another kind of narrative that was much more difficult to justify, I think, was this idea that if you put money into a bank, you will be able to support the growth of Poland, and you will be supporting Polish wealth in general, right? So this is a more complicated argument. Obviously, this has to do with if you put the money in the bank, then that capital can be invested somewhere else, and then you can build the capital base of the country overall. And here we have an advertisement that actually comes from Vilnius, from Vilno, and this is a community savings bank that is saying every zloty saved increases personal and domestic wealth. So it's not just about your own well-being, but thinking about the broader community. A more effective argument that we see is the wisdom of the crowd. If everyone's doing it, you should do it too. And we see a lot of photographs like this one where you have a huge line of people going in, and they're all holding these savings books, right? So they're bringing their cash, and then they're going to get a mark in their book that says that they've deposited more money into the bank account. And we also have a a graph here that's showing the number of savings accounts that are growing. So we go from 57,000 in 1924 to almost 1 million in 1932. So a big jump there. And that's actually from the Postal Savings Bank, which I'll talk about in a minute. And there's also a very important discussion here about gold. So there are a lot of narratives that talk about how the currency is backed up by gold, and that the banks are in possession of gold. And this is a kind of security argument that they're making. And I don't think, though, that this means that the gold standard was important in exactly the way that economists would like to think about it, that there's a relationship between the amount of gold backing and therefore the value of the currency. But it's more just a feeling that if the deposits are secured by gold, that is somehow trustworthy, right? That we should believe what they are saying because they have the gold, right? Because I just don't think that with the lack of financial literacy overall, it's hard to believe that there are all kinds of people who are really understanding the mechanism of the gold standard. And finally, a kind of visual narrative that we see a lot is this idea that these institutions are serious, that they have huge, impressive buildings. And here we have two buildings of the Postal Savings Bank, the main building in Warsaw, and then another, actually a more impressive building in Krakow, which is not the not the main headquarters of the bank. But there is often, even with the smaller banks, they're showing what these banks look like physically, and they're telling you, we have impressive buildings, therefore you can trust us and you can put your faith in us. All right. So briefly, I want to talk about the types of institutions that were out there. So obviously, we have state-owned banks like that Postal Savings Bank that I mentioned. We also have community savings banks and then credit cooperatives. So the Postal Savings Bank is the most important institution at this time. It was a state-owned institution, and their real advantage was location, because every single post office was also a bank, right? So they have literally thousands of branches across the country. Anyone can go there. It's easy to create an account, and you get a little savings book like he's got here. He's very happy because he's been thinking about the future and he's earning his interest. And also we have some images of the inside of the main building, the headquarters of the Postal Savings Bank. So this institution was inspired by the Austrian model of the Postal Savings Bank, but it was actually a little bit better in the sense that they offered loans, not just interest on deposits. And here we have an outlay of who were the customers of the savings bank. Ironically, the largest number of savings accounts belong to school kids. So this actually shows you the success of these propaganda campaigns among young people. And we also have a large number of civil servants, but workers as well, a huge number of workers. And then we have unknown, unfortunately. We have a pretty large number of unknown in that category for 1932. So this is a bunch of propaganda materials from Ukrainian cooperatives that are also super interesting. The appeal among the Ukrainian cooperatives was not necessarily a kind of nationalistic one, though, as you might expect. It was more just about a kind of self-help. So we have, the strength of the people. This is a kind of like elementary introduction book that was about cooperatives that was also included in a lot of these materials. And I like this image a lot. This is kooperacja in the sun. So it's like the sun rising over the Ukrainian village. This image at the top is quite symbolic. So this was a kind of inn, like a village inn, that was then converted into the home of the cooperative bank. So a village inn in kind of the cosmology of the Polish village would be usually owned by a Jewish family. And in this case, it's actually the Ukrainian cooperative that came up with the money to buy the same building. They renovated it, and now it's the home for their banking. And we also have an impressive building in Przemyśl, and this is being pointed out as the first credit cooperative in Galicia. That was called Vira, and that's the building. I believe that building is still there. And we have a really, I love this illustration of the number of members who are joining the cooperative. And this is obviously like an appeal to the crowd, right? Join the crowd. And we go from 90,000 members in 1924 to 272,000. And this is not all Ukrainian cooperatives. This is actually from one kind of union of cooperatives, because a lot of these cooperatives were then organized into particular unions. And this is representative of the largest of those, but not all Ukrainian cooperatives. All right. So I want to turn to the Jewish cooperatives, and here we have some more statistics on the growth of these cooperatives throughout this period. So in the early 1920s, when we had this period of inflation, we actually have a lot of excitement about joining cooperatives. So this is the number of members who are joining these cooperatives. So we see a growth in the number of cooperatives and the number of members, but then a precipitous fall to 1925, and we're down to 50,000, so fewer than in 1922. So what's going on here exactly? Basically, what we see is people excited about joining these cooperatives, and then in 1923, through this hyperinflation crisis, people lose their money. So there have actual numbers here. So if you had a deposit of about $2 in September 1922, so at this point, you have, let's say you have $2. By this point, your deposit of $2 is worth 9 cents. So this is obviously a problem, and people are losing faith in those cooperatives, but they come back, and they come back huge, because then we get up to a quite large number of members and actual cooperatives, so actual places where these things are being organized. And again, this doesn't represent all Jewish cooperatives, but it's just another union of cooperatives. And here we have an outlay of the members in terms of their professions. So we have farmers here, we have capitalists and traders, craftsmen, and then white collar workers. So the largest group are those so-called capitalists, the kind of petty traders and things. But we also have a large number of craftsmen who are part of this group. And there's a lot of postcards like this. These are also part of the propaganda campaign. This postcard, I think, is actually from 1918. But it's like a New Year's card that's also encouraging people to save. So Happy New Year, get a savings account, I guess. And we can see from another outlay of these Jewish cooperatives that we have a really large number of cooperatives by the early 1930s, and about 200,000 members, at least in one of these unions of cooperatives. So I also have a kind of summary here in terms of the number of branch banks. And the co-op group maintained a pretty massive network of branches throughout the period. There's 3,623 branches in 1927, and then 5,597 by 1938. And despite the economic crisis of the Great Depression, we're still, I mean, there's a little bit of a drop off here in 1933, 1934, but it's still a pretty strong number of cooperative banks throughout the whole period. And in terms of the community savings banks, there is a relatively lower growth, but we still have a really strong number of branches. There are about 1,250 savings bank branches in the 1930s. And finally, I want to show just how many people had savings accounts in this period as a way to show the growth in trust overall. So in 1927, we have about 2.1 million savings accounts. And by the end of this period, there are 6.6 million people who have savings accounts in Poland, as far as I can tell. The number could be slightly larger, but this is based on the data that I could put together so far. And that's 19% of the population has savings accounts. So just as a comparison here, so we start off with a really low number, obviously. And if we were to go back further, it would be even smaller. If we went back from before the First World War, almost no one has a savings account, right? In terms of comparing this and trying to understand what this means, Germany in 1900, and Germany is obviously much more advanced in this way. They kind of invent cooperative banking. There's a ton of cooperative banks and savings banks. But in Germany in 1900, there were 15 million savers, so that's about 26% of the population. So somewhat similar. And also in terms of the number of cooperative banks, Germany has 19,000 cooperative banks around the same time, around 1900. But this is a very different process in this area, where you're basically starting at zero at the beginning of the Polish state, and then getting up to almost 20% of the population with a savings account. So that's where I'll leave it for now, and look forward to your questions, comments. Thanks.
So we can open this question now. Oliver, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit on the legacies of the late 19th century in terms of these different political frameworks, because if I recall also from my colleague from the project who works on the Russian partition in Poland, I believe cooperative culture came very late.
Yeah.
To that area, right?
Yeah.
So I was curious how those kinds of legacies reflect then on what was going on in the interwar period in terms of financial culture and so forth.
Yeah. Are we doing more than one question, or should I respond?
One by one.
One by one. Okay. Yeah. I mean, like you said, the cooperative culture came much later to this area than to much of Germany, and so they're basically building from nothing during the interwar period in a lot of cases. So there are certain places where there were cooperatives. The first cooperatives actually show up, I think, in Vilnius, and then they're growing out from there. But for the most part, we don't see the same number of members, and explaining what a cooperative is kind of complicated. So there's a big barrier there as well, and try to get people to even understand what you're trying to do, right? So I think that process happens basically throughout the 20s and 30s, and that's why you can get up to that many thousands of cooperatives by the end. Yeah.
I had a question. I love the talk. One thing that you did not give us maybe too much about is who are you talking to and who are you discussing with? Meaning, why and how did you come to this subject? how do you see, to which extent do you see trust in money and trust in banking institutions as a proxy for trust in state building?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that there are a number of stakes here that we are probably missing in terms of maybe even for today and for what has been said and is thought of for Polish economic transition after the 1990s, financial culture, working culture, a number of things. So if you could maybe restate some of those stakes, I would love it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I have a great answer for you. I think that I'm definitely interested in the state building question, but I kind of put that off to the side. But I think that this is potentially, because I've written about this and talked about this in other contexts. This is kind of a continuation of that thinking about how the Polish state was justifying its own rule throughout this period and how it's growing. But the interesting thing is that, we really only get stability after, I'm not even talking about prior to 1926. What happens in 1926? There's a coup d'etat. And really that's the point at which we can get some kind of stability in this area. And my conclusion about that is that basically business likes authoritarianism. Or authoritarians are maybe better for business in some cases. So I think that's kind of what I'm potentially adding to is a discussion about this, the whole picture of the legitimacy of the state is being built around all these different aspects, right? Because it's not just about like what the politician said on whatever day, but also thinking about these kind of everyday interactions and how people think about the state that's backing the money that they're using. And then the state that's also backing a lot of these banks as well, right? That's guaranteeing the safety of those banks.
I mean, what you show is not only business likes authoritarianism, small savers like authoritarianism. Meaning that if the state actually guarantees the stability of their savings, small savers will go with it.
Yeah.
In a different context, they wouldn't. So
that's
interesting as well.
Yeah. Because, so we get a new currency in 1924. There's inflation in 25. The currency really stabilizes after the coup in 26. And it's not rocket science to figure out that those things are related, right? I think that in the historical literature on this, a lot of people are pointing to like little moves that they made. They got a stabilization loan that was actually very, very small and not enough to do much. But that's the kind of stuff that they're pointing at. So in terms of the stakes here, I'm arguing against that. And I'm saying like there's actually something more cultural and political going on rather than this kind of like economic factors are, stabilizing the currency or something like that. Yeah.
I mean, if we proceed with this cultural and political factors, what about political parties and ideologies? How do they use it? Are certain parties or certain movements more keen on emphasizing this kind of cooperatives, or is this something that every political movement should have at a time, or is there a kind of competition between them also to attract to different cooperatives?
Maybe just to
Yeah.
follow up on that, because like you're talking about processes, I'm wondering more about like the actors behind that. If you can, I mean, not just what Marco said, but also other kind of actors who were pushing for these things. If you can say a bit more.
Yeah. So in terms of the competition and the relation to party politics, that's where we really get into national politics, right? So we have Jewish cooperatives, Polish cooperatives. I didn't talk about Polish cooperatives, but that's a whole other topic. And the Ukrainian cooperatives. And all of them are competing for members in a way, but they're also kind of making a nationalist argument. If you're Jewish, join a Jewish cooperative, right? If you're Polish, join a Polish cooperative. So I think that's definitely part of it. And in terms of the outlay of parties, ironically, it's not just parties of the left that are encouraging cooperatives. Every party is encouraging these cooperatives at a certain point because they see the value in them. The Jews and the Ukrainians are much quicker to this, obviously because they're competing with a developing ethno-state. And so they see in cooperatives a kind of safety for themselves. And I think that argument is very effective, especially among Ukrainians. But for the Jews as well, the cooperatives are oftentimes associated with a particular political party. So, but it's not just like the Bund on the left, but it's Agudas Israel, the really conservative party among Orthodox Jews. They're also saying you should all join cooperatives because it's the way to ensure our safety and our future. In terms of the actors, I honestly don't know who the people are behind like all this propaganda material. A lot of the authors are pseudonyms, so I don't really know who's behind it. I know about the institutions that are behind it because the banks are the ones who are paying for all this stuff to either to have these pamphlets and radio broadcasts and stuff, but also to plant these things in the newspapers because we see a lot of the same things just showing up in the newspaper.
I maybe have a question in the other direction about this propaganda material. Who is it addressing? Because you kind of touch upon it in different points, but that is there any kind of like similarities, any like specific demographics that are more heavily targeted?
I think that in general it's the poor but not too poor, right? So it's the poor but not destitute. That's kind of the key. That's the key demographic for a lot of these people, because if you're talking about like the middle class business owner, they're already somewhat integrated into like the financial system, and maybe they have a loan with an actual bank somewhere, right? But there's millions of people who kind of fit into this category of being like poor but not destitute, who have some little extra coins they could be saving, and that's what they're trying to pull out of the economy to make that into working capital. And a lot of the propaganda that I've pointed out, it actually has particular targets, like those stories that were particularly for women, right? And the story of two servant women, it's directed at servant women, right? That was a huge class of people living in Warsaw at the time. And those are people who probably didn't think of themselves as potential savers, right? They probably thought, oh, I'm too poor to have a bank account. And then this is saying, no, you can put that money away. And they were offering, in some cases, 5 to 7% interest on savings. Like, if we could be so lucky, right?
On the tale of the servant women, I wanted to ask a bit more about how saving discourses were gendered and how they were racialized.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you're presenting the story of the Roma woman, she was not just a woman, right? Like, so
Yeah.
she was a Roma woman. So
Yeah.
how does this play out in the 20s and 30s?
Oh, yeah. I didn't include another one of these horror stories that's really fun, but it's basically the story is like, don't trust Jews with your money. that was produced by a Polish cooperative that was basically discouraging people from more traditional forms of credit in the village, right? That would often people would be borrowing some money from a local moneylender. Often that person was Jewish, and they are saying, don't trust a Jew with your money, but put it in the bank. And in terms of the gender aspects, I think a surprisingly large amount of the propaganda is directed at women. And I don't know, maybe you would have an idea about how to interpret that, but I think that perhaps it's because they thought of women as being more receptive to a kind of instruction, whereas a man might read this kind of instruction and say, well, I know what to do with my money. I know how to manage my things, and kind of reject that signal. But yeah, there's a really large amount of this material that's directed particularly at women and also at mothers. And then that's what you see, like so many school children involved. That's, it's mothers telling their kids to do it, or it's kids who are receptive to the propaganda.
Just a side question. Since you mentioned kids.
Yeah.
But probably parents opened up their accounts for them, or was it legal for children?
No, it was legal for children to have the accounts, and it was part of. So part of the reason why we see so many school children, oh, whoops, I went back to this one. Part of the reason why we see school children as the largest group is because there were actual programs where teachers were bringing the kids to open the accounts, right? And this picture here is a bunch of school kids, right? There are some adults there in the line as well, but for the most part, in the front row here, it's all school kids who are the ones who are bringing their account books to the post office. So.
But did they have some house savings, piggy banks?
Yes. Yeah, that was a common gadget. I have a bunch of pictures of those piggy banks because every local bank had its own little. It was like an aluminum kind of thing. Yeah.
But so they didn't really need any parental permission or.
Not that I know of.
Parents were not, because I think today it's impossible for a minor person to open a bank account without the parental permission.
Yeah, parents do that for their children, I think.
Or they go with the child if it's a teenager and they add their signature.
Yeah, cosign. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, about the gendered aspects, it might be also interesting to think about remittances, because I saw that also in the late 19th century Croatian context, where you have huge diaspora communities living in the US, for example, and I believe it was similar in Poland as well. Primarily men working abroad. They have wives and mothers at home, they send money back home.
Yeah.
And then what you see in the official reports from Croatia at the time, very often, like on the local level, is this discourse about frivolous women, a lot of American women, as they say. So they don't know what to do with this money, they just spend it like on clothes and celebrations and so forth, while they should be investing in cooperatives or in banks.
Yeah.
So probably in Poland, there's also this kind of civilizational gender discourse also quite present about peasant women, for example.
That's a set of propaganda that I didn't include, but there's a separate state bank that's created particularly for Poles abroad. And they have branches in Paris, in New York, in Tel Aviv, and they're collecting remittances from people. And they're also encouraging the women who are at home to tell their husbands who are abroad that they need to open an account at this particular bank, right?
Okay, is there any other questions? Okay, Ivan.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to continue the propaganda topic. So, what about the banknotes and coins themselves?
Yeah.
So they also have like images of important historical people and
You can go back to this one. Yeah.
institutions and so on. So there's also something going on, a sort of propaganda by itself in the central bank. So how is that accepted or viewed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that these notes are pretty impressive. You can't see on this picture, but these blank spots here are spots for a watermark. So you could hold it up to the light and you would see the image of some other historical figure. But in general, they're very solid. They're much more impressive looking, I would say, than the marks that preceded them, the Polish marks that preceded them. And yes, and we definitely have lots of historical figures, historical images that are displayed on here. I can't remember which one is which on this right now. I don't have that in my notes, but yeah, this is it's much more solid looking and sounding, even the text on the note, because the other note, as I mentioned, the old Polish mark, it said that it was a temporary currency. It said that it's supposed to be exchanged for a future currency. It's not really engendering a lot of faith in that, but this is saying that it is the legal tender for payment in Poland, right? So it's much more straightforward. But I think there's a whole lot of research to be done about the actual physicality of these notes and thinking about how that also engenders trust. Maybe you would do that as well.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, good.
What happened with propaganda during Great Depression?
I mean, there was more of it, frankly. There was an uptick in all of this stuff during the 1930s, and yeah, it doesn't slow down. And based on the statistics that we have from the period, I mean, I don't think that the depression really, I mean, you see, you see a little bit of a fall in the number of branch banks, but the cooperatives are not really affected by, or sorry, the savings banks are not really affected by the depression, at least in the number of those. And then in terms of the number of savings accounts, it's rising the whole time, right? We're continually getting more and more people joining the ranks of the savers throughout this whole period, despite the fact that the depression is happening and people theoretically have less cash and less extra cash to be put away. But there's still a lot of people who are joining the banks.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think, because in Yugoslavia it was very different.
Yeah.
Because of that agrarian crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And they had moratorium and they had very big runs on banks during that time.
I mean, there was also, an agrarian crisis in Poland at the time. But I think that maybe those people never were part of this. The people who were basically moving from very little cash before the depression, and then during the depression, maybe they have no contact with cash whatsoever. Those people aren't really, going to join one of these banks anyway.
This is a matter of indebtedness, right? I mean, I don't know how much debt was. I think if I understand correctly, I'm not, you know perfectly well that I don't know about this subject so much, but I think peasants in Yugoslavia were quite indebted back then.
Yes.
And I'm not sure about what the situation was in Poland, where peasants were generally wealthier.
I mean, were they generally wealthier? There's a huge class of underemployed peasants, and during this period, there's a lot of talk of overpopulation. And like excess population, and so then this is where some of the talk about colonization comes from. There's the Madagascar plan. They want to move Poles to Brazil also during this period, and that's based on this idea that the villages are overpopulated. So there is some debt that comes from an earlier period. So in the late 1920s, there's a state agriculture bank that is distributing a lot of capital out to these smaller banks, and then they are giving loans to peasants to buy more land or consolidate land. So that's the kind of extent of land reform that happens, but there's no like massive land reform where you'd have like millions of people who are dealing with debt from land reform, which I think is the case in Yugoslavia, right? That you have actual land reform that then means that they're indebted, right? Yeah.
Do we have anyone from Zoom? Okay.
All right.
So, thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
I would like to invite you to our next lecture with title Developing a Secure Digital Workflow for At-Risk Testimonies. And our lecturer will be Ina Genshow. She's from Center for Contemporary and Digital History from University of Luxembourg.
And when will that be?
Second week of January, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. So we'll have a long break.
Yes,
For the holidays.
holiday break.
Okay. All right. Thanks.